Well, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are continuing with the first chapter in Genesis. We have moved to verse 6 in our careful analysis of this opening chapter and these opening words. And because it's an opening, I think that's one reason. It sets down a whole tone and an idea and the foundation, I suppose, for everything else. So that's one reason why we are looking at this so carefully. So we are actually onto the second day. So, Vayomer Elohim, God said, or thought, right? Yehi Raki'a, let there be.
Rabbi, are you going to share the text?
Oh, did I not? Okay. Okay, thanks, Lauren. I'm sorry.
That's how I know what
I'll consider
verse to go to.
Yes, no. I'll consider it. Yes, absolutely. Here we are. I thought I had, and thank you. Still trying to adjust. It was a crazy week. All right, so here we are. Vayom Elohim. Yehi Raki'a b'toch hamayim. Let there be a Raki'a. And I'm having a hard time translating, giving an actual English word for this. The word that is often used is firmament, which doesn't actually, it doesn't give me a lot to picture. But the word to explain the word Raki'a is that it has to do with a verb that means to beat metal into very thin plates. So when it talks about covering the ark, for example, of the covenant with gold, with gold plates, it talks about rekuot. That's the verb. So this rakia is like a thin film, and that's what we would be talking about. So again, obviously, by translating it as firmament, one doesn't have an easy translation of this. So, betoch hamayim, in the midst of the waters. So let there be this thin film between the waters. Vayhi mavdil, so that it distinguishes, it divides, bein mayim lamayim, from one water to another water. I want to notice, of course, the idea of havdalah, right? Making a distinction, right? Being able to separate this binary nature of the world. So let's take a look at Rashi on this. I'll go back a little bit. And here's where the Rashi starts. Yehi Raki'a, let there be a Raki'a. So interestingly enough, Rashi does not translate this as a creation out of nothing. Perhaps, but what he's saying, Yechazek harakia. So he's saying, let it be strengthened, right? Chazak, be strong. So that's one reason why they may translate it as firmament. In other words, let this thin film be firmed. She'af alpi. So this already existed somehow. It was made out of water. So for example, we know that when you freeze water, it becomes solid. So I'm just trying to penetrate a little bit what is going on here, right? She'afalpi, because even though shenivru shamayim bayom harishon, that even though shamayim, right, the shamayim, the heavens, were created on the first day, Adain lachim, this is supposed to be a lamed, right? Adain lachim hayu. They still were very moist. They were very liquid. This water that existed on the first day. It's interesting, though, that Rashi says they were created on the first day, and yet, in a sense, he's saying they already did exist as he analyzed the grammar of verse 1. So here we go. The karshu basheni, and they froze, right? They congealed on the second day. This is so interesting, right? He's using now such metaphoric language here, from the rebuke, lagaer, to lagaer someone is to sort of yell at them, to correct them in this sort of yelling kind of way, with a rebuke, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the Holy One, blessed be He, the Omro, when he said, Yahi Raki'a, let there be a Raki'a. In other words, be there, Raki'a, something like that, right? Of course, coming from a divine source, that would be so. And then, of course, what is the idea, right? When you rebuke someone, it is a correction of some kind. So what exactly is being described here? It takes some meditating to try to work through this. This involves, of course, an ongoing process for us to try to clarify what exactly the Bible and the tradition is trying to tell us here. Bezeh she'amar, and this is implied by a verse that says, I'm not sure if it's in Job. I don't see the reference here.
Mine says Job
It does.
26:11.
Thank you. Well, there we go. Thank you. Thank you. Amudei shamayim yerofafu. The pillars of heaven trembled. And so he's taking this quotation and he says, Kol Yom Rishon, for the entire first day, they were trembling. Uvasheni, and on the second day, Yitmahu, they were astounded, right? Like basically they were shocked. Miga'arato, from God's rebuke. Ka'adam, like a human being, like a man, shemishtomim v'omed, who is confounded and remains, in other words, who remains confounded, or basically you're shocked into not being able to move. You're so shocked by this response, you just don't know what to do. You just are shocked into, you're paralyzed by it. Miga'arat hamit ha'ayem alav, from the rebuke or the yelling or something like that of the one who is scaring him. So it's interesting, right? This very vivid description, a lot of anthropomorphism in a way going on here, saying that there's some basically emotional, right? It's an emotional description here of how this Raki'a was made, right? And I actually have a thought as to what this Raki'a represents, and we may have talked about it a little bit before. And that is that instead of understanding this as a physical description, that actually we're talking about justice, divine justice. Because we know, for example, that water is used as a reward or punishment for human behavior. We have that in the second paragraph of the Shema, where God says, if you don't follow the Torah, if you're not loyal, he will withhold the rains. And on the other hand, of course, we have what happens in Noah's time, when again, it talks about essentially how the openings of this Raki'a were just, it was like there was a tear in this. And so this Raki'a, I think, is a physical representation of divine justice. And that's why it's this film that on the one hand is protecting human beings given their imperfections and their lack of loyalty. But on the other hand, it's still a film, and so it could get torn, and so divine justice can then be administered. So that's at least what I've tried to puzzle out as to these sorts of things. And in some ways, I hear a tension, right? That on the one hand, we have this tension that it's clear that this world, there are people who get away with wicked behavior in this world. And so I'm seeing this as a way of describing this tension between divine compassion and divine justice. And this Raki'a is a description of that, of this process. So going on with the Rashi, betoch hamayim, in the midst of the water. So Rashi explains this, gives us a little bit of a better sort of physical understanding of it. But emtza hamayim, in the middle of the water, but we have to understand sheyesh hefresh, because there is a separation bein mayim ha'elyonim, between the upper waters, la Raki'a, to the Raki'a. In other words, think of this as being like an airspace, right? That there's actually, it's not like the waters are resting on top of the Raki'a, but that there's actually a space between these upper waters and the Raki'a itself. Kamo bein harakia l'mayim she'ala aretz, just as there is clearly, right, this airspace between the lower waters, the waters that are on the earth, and the heavens above. So we are seeing the heavens as this sort of this film, right? And again, this is not a physical description. This is far more a spiritual description of, so the spiritual reflection of the physical world. So to be very clear, he's saying that there's this space between the upper waters, like the, or to parallel the space between the lower waters, the waters that represent the oceans and that area, and the heavens above. Ha-lamadata. So in this way, understanding this, you can infer shehem tluyim, that those upper waters, right, there's nothing really holding them back. Shehem tluyim b'ma'amaro shel melech. They are simply suspended, tluyim, suspended by the command of the sovereign, of the king. So as we look at the Rashi and try to understand the original text, there's a lot of tension going on. There's a lot of how can I put it, that in fact we should recognize, and I think what this is trying to tell us is that we shouldn't just go glibly about our lives, but recognize that we live in a world where there is some tension going on, and that in fact we live in this world where judgment is suspended. It's like to use a Greek example, the sword of Damocles. So I think there was an awareness on the part of people many, many years ago of this tension and this potential danger that exists if we're not careful, if we don't look at our lives in a very serious kind of way and recognize not to see ourselves as entitled, as entitled folk, but that life is a very ephemeral kind of thing, and a very precious thing, and needs to be very much nurtured, and recognizing that in the face of nature, in the face of the divine, and the grand scheme of the universe, we need to be very, very careful. Going on. Vayas Elohim et harakia. So it says, so this word asa, made, that's how we usually translate the word asa. But Rashi's going to explain that sometimes it depends on the context of this word to get a better understanding of it. But literally we would say, God made et harakia, this Raki'a, vayavdel, and he made a distinction, bein hamayim, between the water, asher mitachat la Raki'a, which were under this Raki'a, uvein hamayim asher me'al la Raki'a, so, and the waters that were above the Raki'a, vayhichein, and so it was. Let's take a look, Rashi here. Vayas Elohim et harakia, right? God made the Raki'a. It doesn't actually sort of mean, again, he's emphasizing that this is not creation, creatio ex nihilo. This is not creation out of nothing. Tikno al amudo, amdo. meaning he set it up in its place. So litaken, he fixed it, right, in its place, in that sense of the word fixed. But it means to set it up in a proper kind of way. Vehi asyato. And that's what it means by talking about him asa it, to use that verb asa. Means that the Raki'a was always potentially there, at least it was in the waters, and that by congealing that part of the water and making a Raki'a out of it, this is the work of the second day. And he gives an example for Asta et Siporneha, where it's talking, I believe, in Deuteronomy, where it's talking about the woman taken in captivity. And Asta et Siporneha simply means, there are two ways. There's some difference in tradition as to, does it mean that she trims her nails, or does it mean that she allows her nails to grow long? But regardless, she doesn't make her nails. Right? In other words, she is doing something with her nails, either trimming them or allowing them to simply get longer. So that's the asa here of the Raki'a. May al la Raki'a, from above. This is the waters above the Raki'a. Al harakia lo ne'emar. And Rashi points out carefully, in looking at this, at the wording very carefully, it doesn't say waters above the rakia, but it says me al rakia, from above the waters. Ela me al la rakia. And the reason it's not above, but from above, means it's a distance from above the rakia. Lefi shehen tloyin ba'avir, because they are suspended in midair.
So mine just says, it does say above, but not on the Raki'a.
Okay, so thank you. I'm trying to make sure that you understand that it doesn't mean above in terms of right above, as
on top of it, yeah.
That it's not right on top of it, but that there's, so I hope that my translation makes it a little clearer. lo ne'emar kitov bayom sheni. And Rashi points out another, this is such a great example of examining the text under a magnifying glass, right? Because he notices, this isn't Rashi, it's from, again, rabbinic tradition. Why isn't it said kitov bayom sheni? Why doesn't it say how good it was on the second day? Lefi shelo, and the reason is lo haya nigmar melechet hamayim ad yom shlishi, because the fabrication, the work involved in the waters, wasn't completed until the third day. V'harei hitchil ba basheni, but in fact, the process begins on the second day. The davar shelo nigmar, and something that isn't completed, eino bimlo'o, it is not in its entirety, vetovo, and its completeness. It hasn't been finished. It's still a work in process. And I think there are some proverbs out there that talk about judging a work in process, that you don't judge a work in process until it's complete. And likewise, saying how good it was is a judgment. And so that's why God could not see how good it was until it was completed. And uvashlishi, and on the third day, shenigmara melechet hamayim, in which the fabrication of the water, or the work involved in the water, regarding the water, was completed. Nigmara, it was finished. V'hitchil v'gamar malacha acheret, and he began and completed another work of creation, right? Kafal bo kitov. He doubles up the phrase kitov. Bet pamim. Twice it's mentioned. Echad ligmar melechet hasheni, one regarding the completion of the work involved on the second day that was started on the second day. Ve'echad ligmar melechet hayom, and another time it says kitov for the completion of the work of that particular day, of the third day. So again, a casual reading of this particular text, you wouldn't notice that, but there's an important principle involved. And of course, again, questions that get raised as you look at this is, so why wasn't it completed on the second day, right? And perhaps it has, again, this might support my contention that it's really talking about judgment and how judgment really is not fair in the midst of things. You have to come to a certain point of completion before something can be judged. And likewise, our lives, that we all are going to be accountable for how we spent our time that God lent to us while we were going through life. And that will not happen. The judgment itself will not happen until our lives here are complete. A little bit more. Vayikra Elohim la Raki'a Shamayim. God called the Raki'a Shamayim. He called this firmament heavens. Vahi Erev, Vahi Voka Yom Sheni. So you see, it doesn't say anything about Kitov. There was evening, there was morning, a second day, and now we're using an ordinal number, not a cardinal number. It doesn't say Yom Shnayim. It says Yom Sheni, a second day. Let's go. Here we are. Vayikra Elohim la Raki'a Shamayim. God called the Raki'a, this firmament, heavens, Shamayim. And he says this word Shamayim, right? You can hear this word Mayim in it, right? There's that word water, right? And he says, Sa Mayim, carry the waters. Sham Mayim, there are the waters. Unless, yeah, that would be correct. Eish umayim, fire and water, a combination of fire and water. She'irvam ze bazeh, because again, there's that word erev, right? And that word erev means a blend, right? He blended this one with the other. Va'asa mehem shamayim, and made the heavens out of them. And perhaps this is just a wild guess that we know about the stars. There is fire there, right? There's fire, the stars, the sun, etc. And quite possibly because of their recognition of the heat that the sun gives off, they might have been saying that he blended this fire with this water. And again, we have to be careful about, how we understand the word water. Perhaps they understood it literally, but for us, we don't need to understand it in that particular way. We can understand from the inner, the spiritual message that the Torah is trying to give us and teach us. This is just an editorial note here. Sfarim Acherim, which would mean other books or perhaps other manuscripts that leave out the Sa Mayim. They don't say that, you'll see, right? Shamayim, Sham Mayim, there is water, and Davar Acher, and it goes on to say another interpretation, Eish Umayim, that the word Shamayim is actually comprised of Eish and Mayim, fire and water. So they would have considered, of course, fire and water to be two essential elements of life and allowing us to exist. So let's do maybe a little bit more, although I'm going now into the third day. We're going at this breakneck pace. Unless you'd like me to pause and you have some overall comments anybody would like to make. Okay.
Well, we only have 5 minutes left.
We do. I know. So
So if we want, I always see this as opening up a new puzzle, a
yes.
boxed puzzle,
Hmm.
and just it's unformed, it's void, it's all a big mess. And
Hmm.
then you start separating out the things that kind of go together and you start forming the, and that's kind of that's my visual for what
Hmm.
is happening here, that and it goes right along with evolution and it goes right along with everything else, that the waters all kind of come together and the land kind of comes together and everything kind of just morphs into what it's supposed to be, and all the elements are there, they just have to be put in the correct places.
So
So
the
like, not from nothing, it's not from nothing.
right.
Same thing with the light is gathered into separate things.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's how I see it. And that's how I try to explain it to kids, because it's hard to explain it any other way. But
Well, I think the difficulty is that when we try to explain this as a scientific explanation of creation, I think we go off the rails, even though I agree that there is some parallel that's going on here. There, if we, on the other hand, say, no, it's talking about spiritual existence, right? And yes, the physical existence is a reflection of the spiritual existence, and that in fact physical existence would not have happened, would have been totally meaningless without the spiritual underpinning. And we're trying to look at the spiritual underpinning. And again,
mm-hmm,
if we follow Rashi's understanding of the syntax of the Torah, which I think is right on the money, okay? I mean,
mm-hmm,
scholars even nowadays agree with that interpretation. The Torah is not commenting or trying to explain as if nothing was around, but as there is being something around. God was always around, okay?
mm-hmm,
Because the problem with trying to start to explain something in another way is that you always can say, well, what preceded that? So we have to start off in a realm where there is no time, because time is
right,
how I believe we understand change. Okay.
right.
There's no concept of time if nothing ever changed. There's also some really interesting midrashim that talk about God creating many worlds before creating this world, and saying
Mm-hmm.
that all those worlds. So, for example, the world of dinosaurs could have been the world of dinosaurs. It could have been the world of, those. I'm trying to think. There's this kind of insect that looks like a scaly bug or something, where these existed, and some were very, very large. But that God created many worlds before creating this one. And the reason why those worlds were destroyed is they had no Torah. And Torah, of course, represents spiritual reality, the
Okay.
spiritual foundations of existence. And it's essentially saying to us that if we live lives devoid of Torah, there is nothing but destruction that follows. On
So
earth.
the word that I would use as the transition word
Mm-hmm.
for that is ruach.
Yeah,
At the very, the
nice.
spirit, the wind, the whatever you want to call
Spirit.
that.
Yes,
That
yes,
is where
yes.
I would, there's where I would, that's what I would do with, like, okay, to for somebody who's like in junior high school, taking it from that part and then moving on from there.
No, I like that very
Yeah.
much. I never thought
Hmm.
of that. And I think, saying that this spirit, this divine spirit, which I
Hmm.
agree could in some ways, very much connected to Torah, was
Right.
hovering above the waters,
Hmm.
right? That's how it describes it. In other words, it hasn't been infused into it. And in sense, understanding, I mean, if we start off by putting down, this is not any attempt to give a scientific description
Right.
of creation. This is not what it's about. And I think,
Right.
I think even junior high school, I don't know. It's been a while since I've taught that
Yeah.
age,
It just
but
depends on what level they're really at.
right. But the idea is asking yourself, what purpose do I have in the world?
Hmm.
Why was I born? Asking that question, That's the essential question. That's not a scientific question. At
No,
least
it's
the way
not.
we're asking it, the way we're asking it is not from a scientific point of view. So I need to stop here. I'm going to stop the recording.
Yeah.